This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Eddie, welcome to episode 3 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we have John Ireland joining us. John is the longtime co-host of Mason and Ireland on ESPN Radio in Los Angeles, and he's also the radio play-by-play voice of the Lakers, which is why he's joining us from his hotel room right now. John, thanks so much for making time to come on.
Sure, Brandon. How are you?
I'm good. You've been the Lakers radio play-by-play voice for over a decade now. You were their sideline reporter for another 10 years before that. So you've been part of the Lakers broadcast team for nearly a quarter century. You've also been a fan for life. Does it still feel like you're living out a dream job?
Oh, yeah. Well, Brandon, most of your listeners will know this, but the Lakers announcer from 1960 to 2002 was a guy named Chick Hearn.
Yeah.
Who, for my money, is the best basketball announcer of all time. And so I grew up listening to Chick. I kind of idolized him. If you listen to me do a game, you'll hear me stealing a lot of his phrases. So for me, this is a little surreal, but still really fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you got to work with Chick for a couple of years when you were the sideline reporter.
Yeah, that was unbelievable. And the two things he told me were, number one, you can never give the score too much. He said, if you ever get lost or you ever lose your cadence or whatever, he said, just look up and give the score. He goes, if you give it 3 times in 15 seconds, it doesn't matter. People can never get the score too much. So that's something that if you listen to me, I still fall back on. And the other thing he stressed with me was just tell the truth. He said, a smart audience will know when you're not telling the truth. And I probably do that to a fault. It gets me in trouble sometimes, but I'm kind of brutally honest when I'm doing a game. So those are the two things that kind of stuck with me from Chick.
And then your broadcast partner is Mychal Thompson, Klay Thompson's father. Is he able to enjoy this front row seat to the Lakers-Warriors playoff series, or is this tough for him?
It's tough. He says that in a perfect world, the Lakers would win by 2 and Klay would score 50. The worst thing, you and I are taping this the morning of game 5.
Right.
And in the last game, the Lakers won and Klay didn't play well. And that's his biggest nightmare. He hates that. But for the most part, he also says that he's in a can't lose, because if the Warriors come back and win this series, then they go to the Western Conference Finals and he'll come up and see some of the games and root for Klay. And if the Lakers win, he and I keep going. So either way, he's going to have an interest as this thing goes forward.
A lot of national media was complaining about the Lakers earlier this season. Like ESPN analysts were sick of talking about them on debate shows, and Charles Barkley didn't want to see them on TNT anymore. But here we are a couple of months later, and they're not just living off reputation. The Lakers are legitimate title contenders. So, like, can you remember a season with a more drastic turnaround than what the Lakers have had this year?
No, Brandon, because there's never been one. We started 2-10. Our chances of making the playoffs were less than 1%. And I mean, if you think about that, if your chances of making the playoffs are less than 1%, you can kind of start making vacation plans for late April and May. But everything changed when they did the trade deadline. And when they did the trade deadline and they picked up guys who fit with our roster better, guys like Jared Vanderbilt, and they moved Austin Reeves into the starting lineup. And all of a sudden, you've got a bunch of guys that fit better together with LeBron and AD. And so for that reason, it's almost like we've had 2 seasons, like we've had 2 different teams. And this team, the one we have now, is really good.
It seemed like everything for the Lakers this season was just going to be a side note to LeBron chasing down Kareem's scoring record. But now that record could potentially be a bit of a side note to something bigger if LeBron gets his 5th ring. Did you expect that record to be the climax of the season story?
When we were 2-10, I did. That's for sure. And it was a great night, and it was a really fun game to call, and I was really happy for LeBron. But it was right after that we kind of turned the corner. And it just goes to show you that anything can happen in the NBA.
Sure.
And for this reason, I mean, we're in the middle of a series now where we're up 3-1. Brandon, I'm probably in the minority here, but I'm one of these people that doesn't think this series is over.
Yeah.
I think the Warriors could come back. And so until we've got them dead and buried, I use the Wizard of Oz angle of that movie you watched when you were a kid. Until somebody issues a certificate of death and I see the legs underneath the house, I'm not going to believe that the Warriors are gone. So we're having a kind of a magical season, all the things that you're asking me about and that you're talking about, but in their minds, it's not over and they still got work to do.
How was that night calling LeBron's record, passing Kareem? Like, obviously you had a lot of time to prepare for it because you knew it was going to happen this season. I thought the call was tremendous. The all hail the new king. Is that something? Did you plan it? Did you prepare for it? Did you know what you were going to say when he set the all time record, or was it a little bit organic?
A little bit of both. I didn't know what I was going to say. And the day of that game, I was driving around and I heard a Prince song. And I knew LeBron loved Prince. And we have two really good imaging guys at ESPN LA.
Yeah.
Shout out to Chris Morales and Mario Ruiz. These two guys, if you give them anything to work with, they'll turn it into something great. And so I had mentioned to Chris, I said, hey, I don't know how LeBron's going to break this record. I don't know if it's going to be in a dunk, if it's going to be on a jumper, if it's going to be on a free throw. But if he breaks it in the flow of the game, if he breaks it on a jump shot, I'm thinking about doing this. Can you make that work if I do it? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And so in that way, it was a little bit planned, but I needed it to break right. I needed it to be within the flow of the game. I needed it to be on a jumper. And when he did it, I just stole that line from Party Man because I knew LeBron liked Prince. All hail the new king in town, young and old, gather round. And then once I handed that to them, to the imaging guys, they milked that for stuff that we still play on the air now. And so we've got a really good run out of that call. Were you
nervous as it got close? Like, obviously you knew it was going to be heard by so many people and be shared. And it's something that, that call was going to potentially live forever. Like, do you take a lozenge at halftime to make sure that your voice isn't going to crack or something?
I didn't. I don't really get nervous when I'm doing games, but you know, it was funny. I actually botched a couple of things when I went back and listened to the whole call. They edited it and cleaned it up for me. So the one that went viral is clean.
Okay.
But I referred to the building as Staples Center, which it hasn't been for 2 years.
Yeah.
They now call it Crypto.com Arena, but I've called so many games at Staples Center that I did that. And I think I transfixed a number when I was reading something else. But the heart of the call was good. I just wanted to make sure that I met the moment. I thought it was going to be a moment that lived on. I mean, that's the type of call that when you call the Laker office and they put you on hold, you might hear that while you're sitting on hold. So I wanted to make sure that the call itself was solid, and I think we got there.
How do you balance that with radio, especially because like TV play-by-play voices that want to let the moment shine, you kind of sit back and don't say anything, but on radio, you have to say something. So how are you continuing to talk, but still letting the moment shine?
Well, in radio, it's not something you think a lot about because the person can't see what you're talking about.
Right.
So I tend to be overly descriptive. You know, back in the days of Chick Hearn and Vince Scully and those guys, they a lot of times did a simulcast. They did both things.
Yeah.
So they had to kind of get a call that you could meet in the middle and go that way. But when you're doing a call on straight radio, you can be as descriptive as you want. And frankly, you should be descriptive as you want. Another tip that Chick gave me way back in the day was that you're that guy, you're the person you want to picture when you're calling a game is you're the guy sitting in a car, stuck in traffic, and you're just trying to get home to watch the game on TV. So the more things I can describe, for example, Brandon, I always describe what color the Laker uniforms are and what color the other team is wearing. I'm trying to set you up so when you get home and get in front of your TV, you'll have a really good sense of what you've been listening to and what you're about to watch. So in radio, you don't really have to let calls breathe as much as you do in TV. And so I tend to be overly descriptive rather than lay back. Now, sometimes when I do games on TV, I'll lay back more, but I don't worry about that on the radio.
Is that ability to be over descriptive, like, is it a talent or is it something that's learned?
A little bit of both. I more something that's learned. I don't think it takes a ton of talent to describe things. If you get a,
Well, I think
a job,
there's part of the talent is also just being able to pick up on things, because like you have to you have to remember and notice to call out the score as many times. You have to notice the colors and remember to mention that. So I think to be over descriptive, you also have to be somewhat over analytical.
right. Well, if you listen to me call a game, you'll hear me say things like Schroeder moving left, dribbling right in front of the Warriors bench, or somebody, or the referee got in the way. The point I'm trying to make is that Staples Center, I did it again. I just did it with you. Crypto.com Arena is one of those places where there's tons of things you can describe if you want to.
Yeah.
We have Kim Kardashian sitting next to the Lakers bench. We have Jack
Right.
Nicholson sitting next to the visitors bench. We have Rich Paul, LeBron's agent, sitting next to Adele, and there's a decent chance that somebody that crashes in behind the basket might land in Adele's lap. That's all fair game if you're calling a game on a radio, and you can't see that. So if stuff like that happens, I tend to focus on that. So I never worry about saying too much.
Yeah.
I'm sure some people wish I would shut up, but on radio, to me, you can't be too descriptive.
How has it been covering LeBron in Los Angeles? Is he beloved, or is his tenure, has it been considered like a little disappointing with only one long playoff run prior to this year?
Everything changed when they won the title in the bubble. Before they won the title, everybody was saying, well, LeBron coming to the Lakers would be a failure if he doesn't win a title. Laker greats are measured in championships.
Yeah.
Every great Laker that you would put on your top 10 list has all won titles, whether it be Wilt or Jerry West or Magic or Kareem or Kobe or Shaq. So when LeBron won that title, he kind of joined the fraternity. And ever since then, I think people are just happy to have him here. Brandon, Los Angeles is a star-driven town. If you don't have stars, people don't care. They don't watch it. They don't come to your games. Our late great owner, Jerry Buss, knew that. And so when LeBron got to our team, the star part was taken care of. People are going to pay money to come see LeBron. But to answer your question, when he really ingratiated himself with Laker fans is when he got that first title. And when he got the title in 2020, now I think his number will go up in the rafters with all these other guys.
Oh, wow. Is that bubble championship, do Laker fans put an asterisk next to it? A lot of national media members do.
I actually thought it was harder. I mean, think about this. Like if you and I were to get yanked out of wherever we live and pulled away from our families and told,
sure,
you've got 2 months where it's nothing but basketball, and may the best team win, and there's no fans, so there's no home court advantage, who wins? I think that's an interesting experiment, and I've always given him more credit. So I know what you're saying. I've heard that too, that other people outside Los Angeles have called it an asterisk title, but nobody here buys that. But I'll say this. If they were to go on a run and win the title this year, it would mean more than that one, just because the fans would be able to see it. That was the worst part about calling games in the bubble. If you ask Jeannie Buss, our owner, she'll tell you that was literally the only thing she didn't like about that season.
Yeah.
It was kind of a magical season. We went through that tragedy of losing Kobe early in the year. And we all thought Rob Pelinka might take a leave of absence because he was so close to Kobe. Instead, he, kind of stayed on the ship and steered it and led us to a title. It was this magical run. But the one thing none of us liked about it was there were no Laker fans in the building when we won it. And so that's why this one would be more special, better if we were able to win in 23 as compared to 20.
Do the Lakers get as much attention locally as they do nationally? And I know it's a weird concept, but even when they're losing, every little thing that LeBron does is a national headline. It's something that's talked about on ESPN. Is that the case in Los Angeles? Because like with the Knicks, I live in New York. When the Knicks are losing, they're not really talked about. They're not talked about nationally. They're not talked about locally. When the Lakers are losing and they have LeBron, they're still a major topic nationally.
In Los Angeles, the Lakers stir the drink. They're the biggest team in town. It's a Lakers-Dodgers town. And then after that, it's USC football. And everything else is battling for 4th to 10th place.
Yeah.
So the Lakers are year-round. I've got a lot of friends at the LA Times, and they often joke with me that if they put Lakers in a headline, even if it has nothing to do with the story, it'll triple the clicks.
Yep.
You know, like housing crisis in Los Angeles. No Lakers live in Eagle Rock. Just because it has the word Lakers in the title, it'll get more hits. So it'd be almost impossible to explain to you how the Lakers drive the narrative in Los Angeles unless you're here. I mean, if LeBron drives to the store and a TV camera picks up on it, that's the lead on the 6 o'clock news. There was a rumor once, Brandon, that LeBron was going to show up at a Blaze Pizza joint that he owns, and 3 television stations showed up just in case he did it. He didn't. He didn't go there that day. But that's how the Lakers are in LA. They're the biggest thing going.
How is covering LeBron different from covering Kobe?
Well, Kobe, because he was here for 20 years and was the only, we watched him grow up. When we started watching him, he was 18.
Yeah.
And by the time he played his last game, he was 38. So Kobe was like part of your family. LeBron is like, to use that same analogy, LeBron's like a really cool guy that your sister married and now he's in your family. And so it makes your family a lot more fun. But Kobe was the type of guy that we were there when he was born. We were there at the crib and followed him through his whole life. But that's really the only difference. People loved watching Kobe play. LeBron's really fun. I'll say this about LeBron, Brandon. I had covered him. I've been a play-by-play guy in the league since 2011. So I had done at least 2 LeBron games every year that I've been in the league. And the one thing I didn't appreciate was what a great passer he is. He actually is as good of a passer as anybody. The best passer I've ever seen is Magic Johnson. LeBron is second. He's that good. I mean, and so when you watch what he does for your team, how he sets other guys up, how he gets you big baskets whenever you need him, and how he's just this freak of nature that we've never seen before. He's 270 pounds and he's not fat. He has no body fat. And it's almost like a tight end. It's like watching Gronk and the other team has got to try and stop him. Yeah. And so it's really fun to cover LeBron.
Did the local news stations cover Kobe with the same, were they following him around just as much as they do LeBron?
Once they started to win titles, yeah. And Kobe started winning titles when he was 21.
Yeah.
So remember, when he first got into the league, he was 18. Him and Shaq were put together. Then Phil Jackson came 3 years later. And when Phil got there, they became like the Beatles, Brandon. They were a rock band. Like Kobe, Shaq, Phil, anywhere they went. With the advent of social media and everybody having cell phones, if Kobe went to Disneyland, the TV stations would send cameras down there to get pictures of Kobe riding the Matterhorn with his daughters. You know, it became that big. And so now I think guys are a little more careful. I think LeBron travels with security guys. He's, very a little more private. But now Bronny, who has gone to high school here and now is going to go to USC, has kind of got his own social media following. So it's now kind of a second generation of the James gang. With Bronny going to USC, and now DJ Rodman, Dennis's son's going to join him there. So USC will be a team to follow next year.
How do Kobe and LeBron compare from a personality standpoint?
Similar. They both get it. They both are very good with the media. They're both super smart, like kind of basketball savants. Kobe was a little more hyper competitive than LeBron is.
Sure.
If LeBron loses, LeBron just goes back, looks at the film, and decides how he's going to come back and win the next game. If Kobe loses, you don't want to talk to him for 2 days. He was that way. He was one of a handful of guys I've met in my life, Brandon, and there aren't very many of them. Jimmy Johnson, the football coach, I used to work in Texas, and Jimmy was like this. They get physically ill when they lose. Losing affects them physically. LeBron is a little more advanced. LeBron will, if he loses, he'll go, okay, why did we lose? What could I have done different? I will tell you one thing about LeBron. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Sean McVay, the Rams coach, but McVay has this uncanny ability to remember any play he's ever called. So you could say to him, hey, Sean, rookie year, second quarter against Atlanta, it was 2nd and 6. Do you remember what you called? Yeah, I called a screen to Todd Gurley, and I wish I wouldn't because the run was open to the right side. And you'll go back and look it up, and there it is, screen to Todd Gurley. LeBron is that way, Brandon. If you ever get a chance to interview LeBron one-on-one, you can ask him about any game in his career, and you can say, hey, LeBron, here was a game 6. You're playing for the Cavs. You beat the Celtics in the playoffs. You had 45 points. What do you remember about that game? And he'll break it down for you. He'll say, I remember in the third quarter, I had 3 fouls, and I had to back off defensively, so I had to kind of change and go outside. I mean, he's that guy. So that's the difference between them. LeBron tolerates losing differently than Kobe did. I don't think either one of them liked to lose, but LeBron's more analytical. Kobe would just get pissed. He would just be furious.
And what about Shaq? How does his personality fit into there?
I often say that Shaquille O'Neal was the best marriage of sports and entertainment in Los Angeles since Magic Johnson. Shaq was the second coming of Magic. He was just a big kid. And I think that's why he's still so successful today. He told me once, Brandon, that he had never spent a dime of his basketball salary income. He was strictly living off of his endorsements. And I'm pretty sure he is still that way. I don't think he's spending any of that TNT money. I think it's going right into the bank. He's just living off of all the endorsements that he does and all his outside interests. He realized at a young age that sports and entertainment go together. And I'm going to be able to marry myself to these two worlds. And yeah, I don't think he'll get mad at me for telling this story, but when Shaq used to I used to travel with the Lakers when Shaq was playing for us, and all those guys had aliases. So you couldn't call the hotel if you found out what hotel we were staying in. You couldn't call the hotel and say, hey, put me through to Shaquille O'Neal. He wouldn't be listed in the registry. But the name he would use back then, I hope he's not using it now or he's going to kill me. But the name he was using back then was Enrico Gates. Like if you needed Shaq, and like if you had to pick up your phone in your hotel room and you needed Shaq, not that I was one that would ever call him, but if I did have to, I would have to call and ask for Enrico Gates. And I asked him one day, I said, what's that about? And he said, Roger Enrico is the CEO of Pepsi and Bill Gates is the CEO of Microsoft. And those two guys are paying me a fortune. So that's my salute to them and to remind me not to spend any of my basketball money. So he was Enrico Gates for the 10 years he traveled with us. And if you needed him, that's how you found him.
That's great. Were you surprised when the Kobe and Shaq divorce happened?
Not surprised. I was mad because we thought if those guys could have stayed together, it would have been it. But it was two type A personalities that both at the time needed to be the man. I don't know how deep you want me to go into this, but here's my 1 minute analogy of what I think happened.
Yeah.
Kobe was the first guy to practice every day and the last one to leave. Hardest working guy in the gym I've ever seen. I've done a bunch of podcasts, Brandon, when I've told the story that I've done radio shows along with my play-by-play my whole career. I do a show now that's on from 1 to 4 in the afternoon, but I've been on an everyday part. I've been a morning guy. I've been a mid-morning guy. I've been a midday guy. I've been an afternoon drive guy. No matter what time I would get to an arena. And a lot of times back in the day, we had to go do the show from the arena. Now we have a device where you can do it from a hotel room, but back then we didn't. I would go there and Kobe would be there. 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, blah, blah, blah. Now, transition that to Shaq. Shaq was life of the party, fun-loving guy, would be the last guy to walk into practice and the first one to leave. So Kobe thought, why am I doing all this work? I'm busting my ass, and we're running the whole offense and the whole defense through Shaq. Well, we should have been running that stuff through Shaq because he was the best player in the league and he was unstoppable.
Right.
And Phil Jackson tried to explain that to Kobe, and he said, look, he doesn't have your work ethic, but what he does have is size and skill that no one else can match. Your size and skill is great, but you're not Shaq. So we're going to run this through Shaq. And I believe that when Kobe had his first crack at free agency, if Shaq was still on the team, he would have left. I think he would have gone to the Clippers. And Mike Dunleavy, who was coaching the Clippers at the time, has told me that Kobe told him he was coming. And then Dr. Jerry Buss, because he was brilliant, sniffed it out, realized that if he didn't cut bait with Shaq, he was going to lose Kobe.
Yeah.
And he traded Shaq to Miami because he knew that if he didn't, Kobe was going to leave. And looking back, it turned out to be the right decision. They rebuilt the team around Kobe. They went to 3 more finals, and Kobe won 2 more titles. So it all worked out in the end, but I don't think there was anybody. Jerry West tried, Phil Jackson tried. I don't think there's anybody that could have got those guys to coexist in 2004.
What was it that more so like that, just that difference in work ethic, or were there actual incidents between them on team buses, in the locker room, on the plane that you ever witnessed?
I think a narrative that, and Shaq would tell you this if you ever get Shaq, that those two like hated each other was false. When they were on the plane together, when they were in the locker room together, I mean, they went to 4 finals together and won 3 championships.
Right.
If they hated each other, they couldn't have done that.
Yeah.
So they didn't hate each other. What kind of broke them up was Kobe didn't respect Shaq's work ethic because of what I talked about before. And Shaq couldn't understand why Kobe didn't get that he was unstoppable, that Shaq was what Shaq used to call the MDE, the most dominant ever. And even if Shaq didn't work as hard as Kobe, he was still unstoppable. Yeah. And so he couldn't understand why Kobe went back. And I will say this, towards the end, Shaq made a concerted effort to try and repair that relationship before he got traded. He called me over once. We were working a playoff series in San Antonio. And normally I had to wait to talk to Shaq because everybody needed him. And he goes, "Hey, come interview me today after everybody else goes away." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Shaq, something's on your mind. What do you want to talk about?" He goes, "I want to talk about how Kobe Bryant's the best player in the NBA." And I said, "You're not the best player in the NBA?" He goes, "Not anymore." He goes, "He's passed me up. He's the best player in the NBA now, and he's going to carry us to the title." And I knew what Shaq was doing. He knew that I knew Kobe. Yeah. And he knew I would tell him. And I did. And it didn't matter in the end. Kobe was just convinced that the Lakers were not going to run the team through him. They were going to run it through Shaq. And he thought that Shaq was going towards the end of his career and Kobe was just starting in the beginning, and Kobe wanted his own team. And I think in the end, that's what broke him up. Brandon, if they could have got a room together and Shaq would have, pleaded with Kobe that he was going to give him the keys to the car, they could have made it work. But Kobe was pretty driven and pretty competitive. So I think it all worked out the way it should.
Did you personally have a stronger relationship with Kobe than Shaq?
I was about the same with both. I was kind of Switzerland. As the sideline guy at the time, I needed both to do my job. And they were really fun to cover. And they're both great guys. And I'll tell you this, when Kobe died, there was nobody more destroyed than Shaq. Yeah. He was destroyed. I mean, he tears up still to this day talking about him. And Shaq's like the toughest guy alive. Right. And he'll tell you he's not embarrassed that he tears up about it. He looked at Kobe as his little brother. And he doesn't focus on the breakup and the fact that they could have won more titles. He focuses on the fact that they got 3 together and they were the most dynamic duo at the time in all of sports. So I think looking back, I tried to make sure I got along with both of them. And that's kind of the way I was able to keep my job and move forward. The running joke was, Brandon, back then, Steve Mason, my radio partner, and I, when we had a light day on the show, Mason would say, "Well, let's just open the phones and say, Kobe or Shaq, which team are you on?" And we'd have 4 hours of phone calls. We could do that now in 2023. But it was cool for me to see when Kobe played his last game, which for my money is my favorite game I've ever done, even though it was on a 19-win team. Shaq was at the game, was one of the first ones to congratulate him. Those guys made up before Kobe died. And I know Shaq is really thankful that he had the chance to do that.
After The Last Dance came out, you had said that that Kobe had a film crew following him the last 2 seasons of his career. Have you heard anything about a potential documentary with all of that that content?
I haven't, but they've got it, Brandon. Yeah. They've got it. They followed me around and shot every one of my live shots that I did for KCBS KCAL Kobe's cameraman was standing behind my camera shooting it just so he had it. So somewhere, and I think Vanessa is running Kobe's company now, somewhere they've got all that footage if they want to do it. And by the way, I hope I'm not talking out of school here. Andy Thompson, who was the guy who shot The Last Dance, Mychal Thompson's younger brother, who has worked for the NBA for 30 years, has spent a ton of time with us this year. And so if LeBron ever wanted to go down this road, I think Andy is stockpiling that just so he has it.
Okay.
And has the opportunity to tell the story. So if we go on a magical run to the title,
Yeah.
Andy, who was the driving force behind The Last Dance, most of the stuff you saw in those 10 episodes was shot by Andy Thompson. And Andy's a smart guy. He's already working on potentially a story about the end of LeBron's run, like he had one for the end of Jordan's run. So the good news is, if you're a basketball fan, that all this footage exists. Whether it ever comes out and they know what to do with it is another story, but they're shooting it and it all exists.
You covered Kobe from the start of his NBA career when he was 18 years old. And I'm sure as his career progressed, you could envision covering him through all the career milestones and the championships and the gold medals, the MVP. You expected to probably be there for his jersey retirement. You expect to be there for his Hall of Fame speech, but you don't anticipate covering his death. So how difficult was that first Lakers game after the helicopter crash?
Well, I don't know if you remember this, Brandon, but they actually canceled the first game after the crash.
Yeah.
We were flying back from Philadelphia after a road trip. And after that, we found out on the plane. We were all on the plane. And they knew our team wasn't ready to play. So they delayed it. It's a game against Portland. They delayed it. And I'm not embarrassed to admit this. I actually thought Kobe had done so many superhuman things when I did it. I thought when we landed in LA, we were going to be told that he walked out of the crash.
Yeah.
That he wasn't dead. I was in denial. I think a lot of us were for weeks, maybe months. But like anything else, whenever we lose somebody unexpectedly, you find a way to go on. I think I'm incredibly proud of the Laker organization and the way they responded. Our team could have cratered that year. I thought Rob Pelinka should have been executive of the year. Now, Rob probably will never win that because he used to be an agent, and the other executives vote on that award and they don't like agents. But if you think about that year, Brandon, Rob was Gigi's godfather. Kobe was his best friend. And he was in his first year as our GM and, by himself. Magic had stepped down. And I thought there's no way Rob can keep going. Not only did he keep going, but they kept together. Frank Vogel kept that group together with LeBron and AD and then won the title.
Yeah.
And I think that all helped us heal. That was one thing. And the other thing was that Jeannie and Rob wrote a letter to everyone in the organization, and they said, hey, don't be afraid to talk about Kobe and Gigi. And I still remember the way Rob worded it. He said, we are now torchbearers of their legacies. So we need to tell other people about them. Like Gigi just would have turned 18 just like a couple weeks ago. Probably would have been going to UConn and playing for Gino Auriemma and being a star in women's college basketball. She's a really good player. A lot of young girls don't know that. So and Bill McDonald, who does our games on TV, we both talk openly about Kobe and Gigi. Jeannie does. Our whole organization does. We want people to remember them. We want people to know their story and what they were like and how they kind of inspired a lot of people. So I don't know if I'll ever be over it, but Rob and Jeannie helped when they made it okay for us to talk about Kobe and about Gigi, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What was that a topic that had still continued during the run through the bubble? Because obviously that's the same year, but with the pandemic causing the delay,
right?
Did it almost at that point when they won the title? I think the finals were played in October. of 2020. So you're now months removed from the helicopter crash. Was the Kobe story still a narrative that kind of played out during those finals?
Well, they embraced it. The team embraced it. They wore those Mamba jerseys that were kind of snake skin with the black on them, and they had a Kobe and Gigi patch on their shirt. And Frank Vogel would lean into it. Like, we had a camera in the huddle, in the bubble, and Frank would look at the players. And it's one of the reasons why I love Vogel, and I'm really rooting for him to get another job in the NBA. I think it'll happen this year. But Frank would go, everybody look at your jersey. And these guys would all look down and they'd see the Mamba and the snake skin. He goes, you're wearing the jersey. Now have the confidence to take the shot. Have Kobe's Mamba mentality. And when Anthony Davis hit that shot against Denver, we were down 2. It was either game 2 or 3 of the Western Conference Finals in the bubble. Anthony Davis, we were down 2. Rajon Rondo brings the ball into Davis. He had 2 seconds. He catches the ball, shoots a 3, and yells, Kobe, and it goes through, and the team mobbed him. So they used it as they to answer your question, they kept it a story. They kept saying, and one of my favorite parts of that whole year was when LeBron was handed a microphone to speak at the first game back, and he had a bunch of notes in his hand.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but he ripped them up. He just goes, I'm not going to use he goes, I wrote something to say, but I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to speak from the heart. And he just rambled for like 3 minutes about what he was feeling and how he was sad and how they were going to play the rest of that season in honor of Kobe and Gigi. And the fact that they won the title doing that is pretty astounding because it was crushing. We were all walking around like in a daze, but they somehow battled through it and were able to pull it off.
How was it calling your first NBA finals from a studio across the country from where the games were being played? And like, I'm not trying to get you to say a woe is me or anything like that.
Right,
like I get we were in the middle of a global pandemic, but it's still not exactly how you would envision your first NBA finals when you took over as the voice of the Lakers.
Right. So it was funny that when we heard we were getting the games back, I would have done them, Brandon, from a broom closet. Remember how there were no sports, there were no anything.
Yeah.
We couldn't even, people weren't even going to the store. And so when I heard we're getting the games back, I just went fantastic. And Mychal and I love doing the games. And when I heard we were getting the games back, and then they told me, but you're not traveling, you're not going to the bubble, you won't be there in person. I literally didn't care. I know that sounds crazy, but I was just so happy to have games. I was going, I'm sure you were too. I was going stir crazy sitting around my house.
Sure.
My son was in high school in the time and he was graduating from high school and he had no classes to go to and nothing to do during the day. All of his graduation pictures are him in a mask, socially distanced from the principal who throws him his diploma like a Frisbee. We were all just trying to make do. And so I look back on that as a really fun time. Was it perfect? No, of course not. Would I have loved to do it in front of fans? Yeah. But for what it was, and then we just kept winning. And, we kept going and winning and winning. I thought, man, they might win this thing. And then they just got hot at the right time. And they didn't even go 7 games in those playoffs. It was 5-5-5-6, and they won the title. So I look back on that as a great memory, even though I didn't get to be there. Now, selfishly, Brandon, as we sit here taping this on the day of Game 5 of the semifinals of the Western Conference, that doesn't mean I don't want to go back and call the finals when we have fans in the stands. That'd be awesome. But I look back on the 2020 title as being a lot of fun.
Have you done television play-by-play?
I have, not a ton of it. Funny, during the pandemic, all of us got COVID. Mychal got it. I got it. Bill McDonald. Stu Lance, our TV color guy, was like the one guy who didn't get it. But Mike Trudell got it. So we were playing musical chairs just to get all these games covered. Trudell ended up doing 3 or 4 games for me. I ended up doing 2 or 3 games for Bill McDonald on TV with Stu. Mychal ended up missing several games, and Trudell came and did color with me. So we had to do it that way. So I've done a handful of, I've never had a full-time TV play-by-play job. I'm primarily a radio guy. But over the course of my career, I've probably done between 15 and 20 games on TV.
Did you see Charles Barkley's comments about sporting events being broadcast on radio last week? He calling the concept of listening to a game on the radio the stupidest thing in the world.
I did, and we played it on Mason and Ireland on the show, and Mason and I both said the same thing. That is a guy who has never lived in New York or LA.
Yeah. Because
if you live in New York like you do, or you live in LA like I do, sports on the radio is your lifeline if you have to go anywhere. You know, for example, I don't know where you live, but chances are if you got to go to a Yankees game or a Mets game tonight, it's going to take you minimum half an hour to get there, even if you're taking the train.
Yeah.
And in my life, I live in Manhattan Beach, which is 16 miles from Crypto.com Arena. And if I leave when there's no traffic, I can get there in 20 minutes. And if I leave there with traffic, I can get there in an hour and 20 minutes. So in major city, you know, Charles is from Alabama, and I love Barkley. He's great. But he's from Alabama. He's used to being able to get anywhere at any time. But if you live in LA, New York, Chicago, the radio is your lifeline. If you get off work at 5 o'clock and the Laker game starts at 5, there's a chance you're not getting home till the third quarter. And so for me, when I was a kid, Chick Hearn was my lifeline to get to the TV. And Mychal and I talk about that a lot, that the Laker fans are super passionate and we're their way to get to the TV. So I try and keep that in mind, that chances are every single game I do, there are thousands of people stuck in traffic in the LA freeway system. I know you've probably had the pleasure of sitting in a car in LA. It doesn't move.
Yeah.
And so I obviously disagree with Charles. It's fine that he doesn't like listening to sports on the radio, but if you live in New York and LA, you need it. It's a big part of your life.
Yeah, and I grew up with it. And when I was in elementary school, Marv Albert was actually the Knicks radio play-by-play voice.
Right.
Like that was some of my first memories as a kid was listening to Marv on the radio. And at the time, I didn't really understand why he was on radio and not on television. But I knew if I put on WFAN at night, I would hear Marv. And that was a big part of me becoming a Knicks fan, was listening to Marv call those games. And I think for definitely for a lot of people in New York, that's the case, where like you have those, and basketball isn't quite like, I mean, baseball is perfect on the radio. Basketball is not quite that, but it's certainly still effective.
Right. Well, and think about this too. You and I are lucky. You grew up in New York, and so you grew up listening to Marv Albert, and then he handed it off to Mike Breen, and you have John Sterling, and you know, in LA, I always joke that I grew up in going to sportscaster school. I just didn't know it. I had Chick Hearn, Vin Scully, Dick Enberg doing the Angels, and Bob Miller, a Hall of Fame Kings announcer. So I didn't know what a bad play-by-play guy sounded like, Brandon, until I started doing it. And I went, why can't I be as good as those guys? And then eventually you go to small towns and you develop your own style and you get better. But it was just a pleasure to listen to all four of those guys growing up.
Did you have any doubt about Shaq's ability to fit in alongside Barkley, Kenny Smith, and Ernie Johnson when he joined inside the NBA? None.
Matter of fact, I thought ESPN missed an opportunity not hiring Shaq. If you look at the two pregame shows, the TNT Inside the NBA, and then the ESPN pregame show, which they have retooled and reconfigured what seems like every year for 20 years. The difference is the guys on TNT do not use a filter. Whatever pops into their head, they say it, and their bosses back them up. At ESPN, if you go out of the fairway, you're off the show.
Right.
Look at Paul Pierce. Look at Bill Simmons. Look at and they'll bring somebody in for you. So Shaq is in a perfect spot at TNT. Again, like what I said earlier, he's the best marriage of sports and entertainment I've ever seen. He gets that people tune into these games to see people say things that are funny. I don't know if you saw it the other night. There was a great moment. Kenny Smith apparently is dating some Instagram model photos. And got caught on TMZ. And like on ESPN, if Kenny Smith was on ESPN, they never would bring that up.
Right.
And anybody who brought it up would probably get suspended. Barkley, Shaq, and Ernie brought it up right away. Like, anybody want to show us any pictures? Kenny does. Hey, Kenny, that's the difference. TNT, you're going to a really fun party. ESPN, you're going to a business meeting. It's the same content, and both things serve a purpose. But ESPN's formal, and TNT's informal, and Shaq is informal. He's perfect for that show.
How is the dynamic for you of hosting a radio show on ESPN Radio in Los Angeles, but still working for the Lakers? Like, do you have to temper your criticism of the Lakers, or are you able to be as critical as you want or need to be on your radio show, even though you're also the team's play-by-play voice?
I'm not as able to be as critical as Mason, my partner, or George Sedano, who does the show after me. Those guys can be openly critical. I think if we had Jeannie Buss on the line, she would say, I have no problem with honest criticism. I don't necessarily need to hear that from you, from somebody who's on my payroll. So I try and temper my Laker criticism.
Sure.
And let Mason, if they have a horrible game, I'll let Mason rip them. I won't, because, again, they probably don't need to hear that from me. Now, Brandon, during the game, they encourage us to be as honest as we want to be. If somebody makes a horrible pass, I'm allowed to say, I haven't seen LeBron throw a pass that bad in months. He can't even believe he did that. I can do that. But the day after the game saying, I can't believe Darvin Ham left Lonnie Walker in a game where he was 1 for 15. What is Darvin thinking? I let somebody else say that stuff.
Have you ever received a complaint from LeBron over something you said, either on a game or on a radio show? Because the national media tries to portray him as being kind of sensitive.
Yeah, I've never seen that side of him. He's never said it to me. I've heard it from people in the front office saying, "Hey, you're killing us. Be careful." But right. I've never had a player say to me, you were unfair. I try not to be. And part of and I know you talk to a lot of announcers. Any good announcer will tell you, you try and criticize the play and not the player.
Sure.
You try not to make it personal. And that's a line that most announcers are pretty good at walking. So, like Mychal is in a weird spot because Klay, his son, is playing for the Warriors and we're working for the Lakers. And he's calling. And in the last game, Klay was 3 for 11. So Mychal tries to rip. He goes, Klay is having an awful night. He usually makes that shot in his sleep. This is going to drive him crazy. He will be out of his mind tonight that he went 3 for 11. Trust me. But he won't say, boy, Klay's a terrible shooter and he's old and he's over the hill and the Warriors should trade him. That's the difference.
Yeah. Last thing I want to ask, and this is kind of like a cliche type of question, which I don't love, but you've covered so many stars in so many big moments that I feel like I have to ask if you have a call that you are proudest of.
My favorite game that I've ever called is Kobe's last game, when he scored 60 points in his final night. And one of our listeners, Brandon, did a really cool thing. He put it on YouTube and matched it to the video from ESPN. So if you want to hear Mychal and I call Kobe's final quarter, just go onto YouTube and type in John Ireland, Mychal Thompson, Kobe's last game, and you can hear it. It was the perfect storm of kind of fantasy meets Hollywood. If I would have told you, Brandon, that Kobe Bryant was going to score 60 points on his last game of his career and the Lakers were going to come from 15 down and win that game in front of all the biggest stars in town, you would have sent the script back and said, this is a little too corny. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. But it did. And I think we nailed it. We still, on August 24th, every year on Mason and Ireland, we play the final quarter. We take 15 minutes and just play the final. I think it's about the final 4.5 minutes, just so people can relive it. That's my, probably my favorite game that I've ever called.
John, you were great. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Brandon, I appreciate you having me. Enjoy the rest of the playoffs and go Lakers. I know as a Knicks fan that you probably don't care.
Yeah.
But
look, LeBron continuing through the playoffs is always good for business. So I certainly don't mind seeing the Lakers advance.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.
Yep, that is John Ireland, ESPN Los Angeles radio host and Lakers radio play-by-play voice. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. I am Brandon Contes. Thanks for listening, and as always, be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.